It's not calling you Josh Frydenberg, it's calling you Dosh Frydenberg.
Under the coalition, taxes for hard-working Australians will always be lower.
You know, I don't hold a hose, mate, and I don't sit in the control room.
They're answers that only can come from Victoria, I'm afraid, because that's not my job.
But I ain't spending any time, though, because in the meantime, every 3 months, a person was torn to pieces by a crocodile in North Queensland.
Well, g'day, folks, and welcome once again to the Two Jacks. We've had a little bit of a hiatus with our wonderful producer, Joel Hill, skipping away to Hawaii, but he's back, and so are we. And when I say we, I mean myself and Hong Kong Jack. G'day, mate. How are you?
Good.
How are things on the island today?
Yeah, pretty good. The rain's going to settle in, I think. It's okay, Joel, going to Hawaii, but provided there are no bushfires.
Well, there were no bushfires as far as I know. I did chat to him yesterday. He seemed to have a lovely time. He was a little bit toey about. He thought if someone had a look through his phone, there might be a few anti-Trump messages there. He might have sat in Hawaii in a very airless, closed room for a few hours before being pinged back to Kingsford Smith Airport. But no, he had a great time and good on him. Jack, since we have begun recording, there's been a lot of analysis on the election. By the way, as votes are being counted, we're still counting, of course. The two-party preferred is 55.19 to 44.81, and that's a belting in anybody's language. But one of the things that in the wake of the election, we saw a number of commentators try and make the point that it wouldn't have been so bad for the coalition and the Liberals Party in particular if we had a first past the post voting system, Jack. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't waste any time thinking about that because I don't think our optional preferential voting system is going to go away.
Well, it was introduced in 1918, Jack, the preferential voting system, and it was introduced, Jack, to stop Labor's power in winning seats when there was actually a number of parties on the right wing.
Three-corner contest, in other words.
Yeah, so that's why the first past the post went by the wayside. I'd also have to say, Tom Elliott, I saw, Jack's son.
Yep.
3AW, I think he does the afternoon stretch or whatever it is. He was babbling like a lunatic about it. The reality is that if it was first past the post, the Liberals may have won some seats, but it's like, if your auntie had a sex change, she'd be your uncle. I mean, it's one of those things where if people were voting first past the post, they would perhaps vote differently, Jack.
They may. There are occasional moves in the UK to try and introduce this to solve what they see as their problems with first past the post elections. I just think they're two different systems, and people would campaign, operate differently in the same way that right. if you took away the compulsion. Well, it's not actually a compulsion to vote. It's a compulsion to have your name ruled off the roll.
Yes.
If you took that away, that would change the nature of elections because then people would be chasing the vote rather than fighting over the scraps in the middle.
Yes, I think what's one of the benefits of our system, of our democratic system, is to have one, compulsory voting, and two, preferential voting. I don't think one goes. I mean, look, there are a number of countries that do have compulsory voting and first past the post, but I think it goes pretty comfortably together. My favourite psephologist, Jack, the Tasmanian, Kevin Bonham, he's a person, a curmudgeon, I suppose, and I actually dearly love him. He doesn't suffer fools on election analysis, but he said in a piece in The Guardian, removing preferences would probably have changed very few seat outcomes at recent elections. at a massive and grossly unfair cost to the ability of those not supporting major parties to effectively say what they are really thinking at the ballot box. It's exactly right. So the minor parties, Greens, those on the right, would, it wouldn't be worth a drum. They're just not going to win. There are also some coalition wins at this election, Kevin writes, i.e. Longman, that could be lost under first past the post because minor right party voters would be less willing to vote strategically than minor left party voters. In recent years, he writes, I have seen some supporters of minor right parties opposing preferences too, claiming that preferences are a uni-party plot against the little guys. The preferences were actually introduced, as I said before, by the Conservative parties in 1918. I think people like Jack's son, Tom, just got pretty short memories, Jack, because in 2019, the Libs pretty much got over the line with UAP preferences. So it's just one of those things you can have a whinge about it, but you might get the benefit from it the next time.
Yeah. That's certainly true. It swings and roundabouts. What comes around goes around. I haven't ever heard Tom Elliott on the radio. And I'm aware he does it. And I'm always kind of thinking, look, we shouldn't, we should give the bloke a fair chance. Just because his father was Jack Elliott, we shouldn't we shouldn't start from a position too prejudiced against him.
He is very much his own worst enemy in that respect, Jack.
I've seen the photos. He looks an awful lot like his dad, which must have been a fair handicap to carry.
Yeah, perhaps hasn't got the enormous nose of Dad. Also sort of hangs around the Carlton Footy Club a bit more than I would like, Jack. But anyway, the Libs and Nats, Jack. It was a case of a temporary divorce and now a love-in and respect shown. Do you think the Nats will be doing their own laundry now? They might have got a few new tasks to do around the home, have a date night every couple of weeks, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I don't know. I always think it's very hard from the outside to know who's going to be paying the price.
It seems like Little Proud is very much diminished by all of this. He met Susan Ley. They'd been in conversations in the wake of the election. He'd met with Susan Ley while she was in Albury. They were talking about policy reviews and these sorts of things. Then there was the National Party spill. Little Proud was elected. Matt Canavan was the other nominated potential leader, and I think Canavan did pretty well. I mean, obviously Little Proud won, but I think Canavan's numbers might have caused Little Proud some concern. So the next step was to have a meeting with Susan Ley and put forward 4 policy positions that were take it or leave it. Now, Susan Ley had said, look, we're going to review all their policies, so she couldn't say yes to it then. But then there was another little introduction there, Jack, another little thing that the Little Proud was kind of insisting on, that members of the National Party who were in the shadow cabinet would not be constrained by cabinet solidarity, which is just like, oh, what do you want Anthony Albanese to be Prime Minister for the rest of his life, or maybe ours? And apparently that wasn't put to the party room, Jack. Little Proud's insistence there. Very strange. They've dropped it all now. They're back. They've got that loving feeling back. And the coalition front bench was announced yesterday. Did you have a look at it, Jack?
I did. I think it looks okay. Can I just say this about cabinet solidarity?
Yes.
It's terribly important when you're in government. And it sort of exists when you're in opposition, but it's never been, I can't ever recall it being strictly enforced. There's always been kind of rogue opposition.
You can't have senior members of the coalition freelancing, Jack. You just can't have it.
You shouldn't, but you do when you're in opposition. I actually think the shadow cabinet looked okay. Look, it's not the Hawke cabinet from 1983, but it looks all right.
No, it's not.
But it looks all right.
Look, I think Ted O'Brien will be a good shadow treasurer. As we've discussed in previous pods, he's He's got plenty of ability. I think he got handed the hospital hand pass with nuclear in the previous parliament. But he's a very talented guy. James Patterson's moved to finance from foreign affairs. But let's talk about the outs, Jack. Sarah Henderson, shadow education portfolio. She's gone. One of the criticisms I have about the Liberal Party in recent times is that people like Sarah Henderson exist in the Parliamentary Liberal Party. So she was the member for Corangamite.
Yep.
She got rolled. It was the only seat Labor won in 2019. And then 6 months later, she turns up in the Senate, Jack. And I just think, well, you're just telling the people, at least of Corangamite, that, well, we don't accept your judgment. So she's been pushed to the front bench. She was on the channel. Oh, she was on the Sky election coverage on the night. Wow. Anyway, she didn't cope well. So she's gone. And the other big one, Jack, is Jane Hume. She's been given her marching orders. So she was pretty much, after Dutton, was the sort of leading spokesperson of the Liberal Party anyway. And
Michael McCormack and Barnaby Joyce have gone as well.
Yeah, and that's really significant. I mean, I'll make a little prediction right now that Little Proud, where are we, May, he'll be gone by November. And they could knock him now, I reckon, but they're just going to let it go.
If you're going to stand there with sit in Parliament with Barnaby and Michael McCormack behind your back, you're going to be borrowing John Howard's Kevlar vest.
Yes, one of those anti-knife sort of vests. That's my prediction to you, to our listeners, Jack. By the end of this year, David Littleproud will no longer be the leader of the National Party. Susan Ley, I'd have to say, has done a reasonable job. I think she took the Littleproud's umbrage well. And, well, she did, in fact, reach out to McCormack and Barnaby to try and get the coalition back together again. And I think she's handled herself with aplomb. I mean, it must be said.
She's had a pretty good couple of weeks. But, you know, it's an awful job she's taken on, and just see how she goes.
Yeah, but it must be said, too, that Littleproud's basically my way or the highway negotiation tactic occurred less than a week after Susan Ley's mother passed away. I mean, it just looked awful. But that's not a knock on her. That was just, can't you wait? Can't you wait a week? Can't you wait 2 weeks? Can't you wait a month? All right. Nick Cater's had something to say. Well, Nick, he doesn't know whether he's Arthur or Martha at the moment. He started an op-ed piece on Monday with all credit to ABC 7:30 presenter Sarah Ferguson, who last Tuesday asked Susan Ley the most incisive question of the week. What is it about winning elections that you understand that John Howard doesn't? And she was obviously... that is, Sarah Ferguson was obviously referring to the breakup of the coalition. What do you make of Nick's position, Jackson? Nick has this view that the Liberal Party is the party, or should be the party, of working class Australia.
That's not how I read his piece. But look, Howard's probably right that they're better off being in coalition. But I don't think it would have been fatal for them not to be. This is just going to take some time to work through what their positions ought to be. You just can't rush this.
You can't rush it. No, absolutely. You can't rush it. And I think that...
And there's no reason to rush it. You're not going to be in government anytime soon. So you take your time and get it right.
And I think also that they basically... they're being convinced. There was a lovely little interview that Barry Cassidy did in the wake of the election where they had the numbers man, the strategist for the Liberal Party, whose name just escapes me at the moment. And he was saying he met up with a fairly senior Liberal Party executive, and the bloke said to him, says, I've got to go and watch Sky News after dark. And he said to me, "What do you want to do that for?" And he said, "Well, I want to know what my branch. I know what's going to be raised in my branch meeting." Now we've got a fair amount of cart pulling horse here, Jack. They need to be clear-headed about their future. This idea that they should shift further to the right is something that they must reject. However, they need to be a party that is, to use that terrible cliche, the Howard's broad church. So it needs conservatives, but it also needs moderates.
Yeah, it's taking their time. This will all work itself out.
You reckon?
Yep.
Well, what happens if it doesn't work itself out, Jack, and we go to the next election, they come back, Liberal Party comes back with 10 seats?
Yeah, I don't think that'll happen.
There's a view certainly that's a distinct possibility that we are watching. And look, Australian political history pre-World War II is littered with the bones of conservative parties that have fallen by the wayside. And they're always replaced with something else. So it's not as if political parties have a right to exist. They exist only by the largesse of the voters.
Yeah, but if the Liberal Party does fail, if it is destroyed, it will be replaced by something else.
And that thing might be a whole lot worse, Jack.
It could be. Yes.
Yeah. So I actually hope that the Liberal Party can get their act together. But if they're being driven ideologically by external forces, I think that would be a really bad thing to do.
Yeah. We have the benefit of me. I've never actually seen Sky After Dark, but there you go.
It's been almost required watching over the last couple of weeks, Jack. There's not a lot going on there, but yeah, they need to be clear-headed about what they want to do. Susan Ley, well, she may be leader of the party at the next election, or she may not be, but they need to hold these reviews. They've ignored young vote. They've ignored the young vote. They've pretty much ignored all their problems that they've got with women voters. And this is not just about pandering to the inner city. I mean, I've mentioned this quote a number of times. Dutton in 2023 said that the Liberal Party was the party of regional Australia. And it's like, okay, so you've actually looked at your constituency where you've lost seats to the Teals and said, well, we're going to go and find another constituency. And it is, that's how it ended up as bad as it did. So they got some big problems, but also the Labor Party has a big problem, Jack, and that is when you've got a thumping majority, it comes with its own share of issues and worries. Hubris is the first one, and then you've got a fair amount of jockeying for positions, Jack.
Yeah, and generally speaking, if you have a larger than expected win, you get quite a few people who sort of fall into Parliament who you'd be quite happy to see disappear next time because they're not much good. But on this occasion, they've actually picked up a few quite talented people.
The one that you've mentioned here, Jack, is I presume that's pronounced Xi Sun.
Yeah. He's the former DFAT chap.
Former DFAT chap. He beat David Coleman in Banks in Sydney Southwest. A veteran public servant, served as Australian ambassador to Afghanistan. So that is a high-profile candidate right there. He was an advisor to former Prime Minister Kevin Rudd. Well, we'll forgive him for that, Jack. And has since primarily worked in education and has spent time with New South Wales Government Behavioural Insights Unit. A very clever fellow. The member for Hughes, Labor. I don't think Labor's won Hughes since about 1970, Jack, but they did win Hughes, formerly the seat of Craig Kelly, parts of going up to sort of Lucas Heights, almost as far as Cronulla, and then a great sweep of it goes into Liverpool, and more into Liverpool than was the case. There was a redistribution. But David Moncrief's got some talent as well, Jack.
He was actually encouraged to think about perhaps taking getting pre-selection for a more winnable seat. They thought he was that talented, but he said, "No, I think I can do this." And besides, I stood last time. He did.
Yeah, so he he resigned his job as an advisor to New South Wales Labor MP Marianne Stewart to contest the election. But prior to that, he had worked for the Australian Prudential Regulation Authority. And so he's a very sort of talented fellow that they would need to provide, a bit of boost to their economic credentials. The winner in Sturt, Claire Clutterham, I should say, sorry for stumbling over that, is a former lawyer who has provided advice and representations for Middle Eastern governments and state entities in international arbitration. So you're absolutely right. Some of these guys, you would imagine some sort of normally unelectable flotsam might have made their way in, but here are some pretty talented people.
Yeah. There isn't a Craig Thompson there, for instance. Can I just add in a shout out to an old friend of mine, Majonna Jarrett, who won Brisbane. I've known her since her husband since the mid '80s and her since the late '80s, and she was a radiologist when I first met her, but then went into government in Queensland and then worked in government relations for Deloitte, and she's worked in Hong Kong and New York and Brussels and has a terrific CV and is a real talent. These are the sort of people who you could have expected to be rushed into a parliamentary secretary position pretty quickly, but there's such a big majority that's not going to happen. So that's going to take this is going to take some management. You've got to give these people something worthwhile to do.
What about the factional stuff, Jack, where Ed Husich, the former Minister for Industry, a significant front bench role, lost in a factional carve-up to appease the New South Wales left and Victorian left, and also lost was Mark Dreyfus. And look, I mean, politics moves on, public service moves on, but I thought Dreyfus did a wonderful job under enormous pressure, particularly after the Hamas attacks. But he lost out really on just the factional carve-up. Now, Elbow could have intervened, couldn't he? And said, well, you go away and sort that out, but I want Mark Dreyfus to be my Attorney General. And instead, he opted for Michelle Rowland, who, in my view anyway, is a lesser choice.
Yeah, I didn't think he was a great Attorney General, but I agree with you that he's been under a fair bit of pressure with the Hamas thing. The Prime Minister could easily have intervened, and he's got enough weight behind him at the moment to have intervened successfully, and he chose not to.
Yeah, some of our listeners might remember the 2007 Rudd ascendancy, Jack, and Rudd just put the fist down on the desk and say, I'm going to pick my front bench. And that is not going to work within the Labor Party because there's factional plays, and it's not as if they have to get the mathematics exactly right in terms of representation within the factions in the front bench and in the greater ministry. But though, if Kevin Rudd, and Kevin Rudd did upset quite a few people in appointing his ministry, Elbow at least knew enough to say, well, I'm going to let these people have their head. But he did have the ability to jump in and perhaps save someone like Dreyfus or indeed Ed Husich, who really didn't put a foot wrong in terms of industry. So that's their biggest threat, isn't it? Hubris, a sense that they are not being watched closely enough by the opposition, who've got their own problems, licking their wounds, and these things never lead to good government. I guess we've got it there in spades when we look at the Victorian the setup in Victoria. Jacinta Allen, you talk to people, anybody, about things in Victoria, and they'll tell you the things are pretty crook, but no one ever says, hey, I just can't wait for the Victorian Liberal Party to take over government, because they are an absolute clown show.
Yeah, I would say the biggest risk for the federal government is it's the usual sort of story in politics. things are really quite as good as they seem, and things are really quite as bad as they seem.
And this is what the cricket coaches tell us, Jack, that you maintain an evenness, a balance, that you don't accept the plaudits so easily when you're going well, and you shouldn't push yourself too hard if things are not going well.
There's lots of life's lessons to be learnt when you're sweating under a hot sun playing cricket.
Yeah. We will take a look at the Victorian Liberal Party next week, Jack. As of 5 o'clock Friday, now we're recording this on a Thursday, the 29th, so as of 5 o'clock tomorrow, that is when the former leader of the opposition, John Pizzato, will have to pay the, 2.5, 2.3?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, $1 million, and really has no capacity to do so. And the Australian reported earlier this week that that the lawyers acting on behalf of Moira Deeming are seeking to recover the costs from former premiers and some current MPs, Jack.
Yeah, they're threatening to add those to proceedings against Mr. Pizzuto to recover the money.
And a federal court judge would have to determine that, surely.
Yes. There'd be, in cricket terms, a fair bit to play out before that happens.
It just seems like a lot of bombs are being thrown at Jack. So we will take a look at that next week when we have a clear review. I mean, if John Pizzato is bankrupted, there will be a by-election in Hawthorn.
Yes.
And you can't sit in the state has different approaches to the qualification for parliamentarians, but bankruptcy is a no-no across the board. And so if he's unable to pay bankruptcy proceedings, he would have to be bankrupt. He can't just be bankrupt in some sort of esoteric sense. So the next step will be to take him in the federal court and bankrupt him.
Yes. He might choose to go before that gets to that point. But
that's probably true. A complete and utter mess, and we will divine our way through it next week. Now, moving over to the United Kingdom, Jack, our listeners may not be well aware of this. We're talking about the Chagos Islands and Diego Garcia. They may know that Diego Garcia is a US Air Force base. Both islands in the Atlantic, in the Indian Ocean.
In the Indian Ocean. It's a joint US UK base, but it's mainly run by the US. But the UK has a presence there.
And what is happening, Jack?
Well,
they're selling it, aren't they? Oh, no, they're giving it back. They're not selling it. They're giving it back to.
Well, they're not even giving it back because it has never belonged to Mauritius. They're giving it to Mauritius because there was an opinion in the International Court. International Court of Justice that it ought to belong to Mauritius, but the opinion's not really based on anything concrete. It's just a little bit of post-colonial guilt that we must give everything back, and if we can't find someone to give it to, if there's no one obvious to give it to, we must look around and find someone to give it to. It's a terrible piece of law, and there is no good reason to be following it. I mean, this is not binding law. The UK is not bound to follow it. It's just an extraordinary decision, in my view. But not only are they giving it back, or giving it to Mauritius, they are paying for the next 90 years for the right to use Diego Garcia. This is very popular, very unpopular with people who live on the Chagos Islands, the Chagosians as they're called, quite a few of whom live in the UK, and they are devastated by this because they have no relationship with Mauritius and don't want to.
Okay. I presume there's some distance. I did once map Diego Garcia, but the Chagos Islands, how far away are they from Mauritius?
About 4 days sailing, I think.
It's not really helping, Jack.
What
are you going to give it to me in nautical miles?
They're on the other side of the Indian Ocean.
Okay, so it's some distance away. All right, but of course there are probably bigger fish to fry in the UK, Jack. Is the Starmer government reeling a little bit at the moment? Is Keir Starmer in any sort of trouble? Circus-Dome, I should say.
I would have said no, but then I started picking up all this gossip about, is Angela Rayner, the deputy, preparing herself for a challenge? And I thought, oh, this is ridiculous. He's got such a big lead.
Sounds ridiculous to me.
But these rumours are persisting, and the polling is looking awful, really bad. Most recently, I saw this week was Reform with an 11% lead over Labor. So Reform on 32, Labor on 21, and the Tories 15, I think. That would be the Reform lead is now in the realms of them winning government.
Yeah, and look, the other thing that you'd say about that, certainly the Conservative vote's up a little, and there was concerns about them in a sort of an existential way after the last election. But that, if you combine those two votes, that's a cracking sort of Conservative vote across the country, isn't it? Large number there. You'd have to say, I mean, look, bearing in mind we just mentioned Kevin Rudd in 2007 and then on to 2010 and the nightmare that was caused around his sacking and all that sort of stuff. You would think with the parliamentary majority the Labor has, they should have the courage to brave this out.
Yeah, there are also the persistent rumours of Starmer and the super injunction that don't seem to go away. And, you know, he absolutely is on the nose. And I'm now coming to think, well, it is possible that they will replace it.
Yeah, but I think we've got a fair way to go before that happens, Jack. Even if that's right. I mean, how long have they been in power?
A couple of years, 18 months. Yeah,
less than 2. And they've got a long way to go with a thumping majority. So there are a number of things they need to get right. They need to get immigration right, and that's easier said than done, of course. But they do need to get that right. And you know, so there are particular challenges facing them. And of course, the Reform, being a minor party, you know, they could just blow up and destroy themselves based on sort of personality conflicts, Jack.
Well, they've already had one of those.
Yeah, they do it all the time.
Yeah, and yet here they are, 3 months after that possible implosion, and they now got a huge lead, 11% lead in the UK under their electoral system is huge.
One thing that I don't understand about, and it's media, and it's not just media, but it's also the community generally. No one blames Reform or their leader for Brexit. And when you talk about economics, and you can talk about immigration, and you can talk about other issues and what it's cost or has contributed to the economy. We're about to do some GDP per capita stuff here in Poland. That's the next step in the podcast. But when you look at GDP per capita and the consequences of Brexit, all driven by Farage, or he was certainly the number 1 or 2 after Johnson in pushing Brexit. I just don't think he's ever had to deal with the consequences of Brexit politically, and that's because you've got Labor and the Tories who are completely split on it.
And that's evident in the polls, yes. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know why he's not been beaten around the head every day about Brexit, because that's reduced. That alone has reduced GDP per capita by about £2,000, Jack. So it's an astonishing failure, and really they have not been brought to book over it. So if I was in the Labor Party, I'd be kicking them every single day about it.
The difficulty with that is that 40% of the Labor Party agree with breakfast and still do.
Fucking idiots. Anyway, Poland, as I said, will it lead? You've got a message here, Jack. Will it lead Japan in GDP per capita? Well, it's about 2/3 of it at the moment.
Yeah, and I'm always cautious about some of these predictions. The current prediction is that and generally accepted, is that it will pass them in 2026, 2027. But they were the same people who were making the prediction that Japan would pass the US back in the 1980s. It just never happened.
The figures I looked at show, all in US dollars, Japan's GDP per capita are 33 and Poland's about 22. So the figures that have been put out, GDP per capita shouldn't be something you get so horribly wrong. But look, it is probably, it's a driving force in Europe at the moment. They do have a presidential election on the weekend too, Jack. You know much about that?
No, not a lot. I would expect that, so far as I've read, I think the current government will survive. But the thing about Poland is that it's an extraordinary success story in Europe. It is the success story in Europe at the moment.
Well, they do have a presidential election between the sort of hard right party and the centre party. There's been a bit of concern. The Americans are getting somewhat concerned about where the money has come from to support the centre or the centrist candidate. And this led to Kristi Noem weighing in and suggesting that the far-right candidate should be elected. I don't know. The US, they're just meddling in elections openly now, and not well. If we look at Canada, Australia, there have been some massive turnarounds that is very difficult to see beyond the role of Trump in determining those outcomes.
Do you think they should leave the election meddling to the EU?
No, leave it to the CIA in traditional fashion, Jack. Come on.
Okay. I don't think the election will change much about Poland because there seems to be
it's a presidency only, so it won't affect their numbers, their parliamentary numbers.
And the consensus in Poland is that they are on the right track, and demonstrably they are. On any measure, they're going better than anybody else in Europe, or heading in the right direction more than anybody else in Europe.
And just about any European traveller you talk to will say Poland is just one of the great places to visit. And I would put the Czech Republic in there too, along with Poland. Just fantastic places to visit. Welcoming, friendly locals, a beer drinking culture in both states, of course. And just genuinely one of the loveliest places on earth to visit.
And they're starting to see the return of the Polish diaspora, people who had left Poland. They've got a relatively well-educated workforce who left to go and work elsewhere and now returning to Poland because the economic opportunities are there. The only thing they're lacking really is, I would say, they have a very low rate of saving, so they have not much internal capital. So they rely on foreign direct investment to provide.
The history of Poland is fascinating, Jack. And one thing I'll mention just very briefly is that the Kingdom of Poland and Lithuania was about in the 17th and 18th centuries. It created a constitution that prohibited religious persecution. I mean, these are, when I say 17th, 18th, so 16th, 17th centuries. And these were times, this was during the time of the Counter-Reformation. And, of course, other people from other religions fled to Poland on that basis, including Muslims and Jews, of course. And one of the reasons for the large Jewish population in Poland before the Nazi invasion was because of the hangover of the Kingdom of Poland and Lithuania and the religious tolerance. Sort of a bizarre sort of turn of events meant that many Jews were in Poland, and I think there were only several thousand left after the Holocaust. Their numbers were in the millions prior to 1939. Rich and fascinating place, worth looking at if you're going to make a trip to Europe. You can go to Paris and step in dog shit, or you can go to Poland and have a really good time there. They are the economic powerhouse of Europe. Over to the States, Jack. The big beautiful bill. I don't even care about naming these things anymore, do they? The big beautiful bill, which is Trump's tax cuts and raising the debt ceiling to $4 trillion, Jack. It's gone through the House, and it'll probably go through the Senate. There were key election promises that haven't been met. I mean, I'm just reading this piece from Nine Media that the bill will eliminate tax from tips and overtime until the end of 2028. The bill doesn't do that, Jack. The bill specifically doesn't change the tax rate for tips and overtime. And all it is basically a massive handout. Well, you might say if you're opposed to big government, then maybe people should be given the money by way of tax cuts. But again, they just seem to be locking in enormous amounts of debt, and it's causing huge problems with their bond market, and it's now leaking over to the Japanese bond market, Jack. But most unhappy with it at all, with it, was Elon Musk, who was interviewed looking a bit destitute, actually, when he was there. He hadn't scrubbed up well at all. Well, he hadn't slept for about 4 days. And he was very critical, openly critical, publicly critical of the bill, Jack, which probably means his days of Doge are now over.
I think they already were over, but
Well, they kind of were, but I think now the number of people that will take his telephone calls has diminished considerably.
probably that's right. I saw the interview, or what of it we've seen so far. There's going to be a more of it released on the 1st of June, I think. I didn't see it as being hugely critical. I said, in his terms, he said he was disappointed that there hadn't been bigger cuts in government spending, and that they hadn't backed up the work that had been done in Doge by reducing government spending. And yeah, that's where he left it. I didn't see anything further critical on that.
His Doge, he claims his Doge has found savings of $175 billion. They were talking trillions early on, weren't they?
I think he did use that, yes.
Yeah. So now it's $175 billion, which is a lot of money, let's be honest. But the wall of receipts amounts to less than half that figure. So a lot of controversy from, not a lot of return. Moving on to Maha, Jack, probably the most alarming thing about what's going on in the United States through the Trump administration is the Make America Healthy Again nonsense put up by this freak show and charlatan Bobby Kennedy Jr. It's not just the anti-vax rhetoric, although there's that. He's now threatening to stop government scientists from publishing their work in major medical journals, which includes things like the new these outrageous communists like the New England Journal of Medicine, Lancet, and JAMA, which is the Journal of American Medical Association. If you're a federal employee, you will not be able to publish that. That's what he's talking about now. And it really does sound super sinister. Most recently, COVID vaccines will only be available to those 65 plus, as in terms of a government rollout, a subsidised government rollout. And anyone under that age, as of August this year, will have to pay for their own COVID vaccinations, Jack. And this is happening while there are big spikes in COVID and big changes in terms of variants.
Is anybody still taking COVID vaccines?
If you're not, you should. Quite seriously, talk to your doctors, of course. If you're not, you should. The sort of stuff that I've been looking at, Jack, is that COVID infection is actually giving rise to higher incidence of a whole raft of conditions, including ischemic heart disease, dementia, type 2 diabetes, these things, that there is a real knock-on effect of having COVID infection. Now, the vaccine won't stop you being infected, but it will diminish its effect on you. And one would hope, although we don't know, one would hope that obviously that those knock-on health effects from COVID infection will come. It's quite alarming, Jack. I mean, some people were talking about chronic fatigue syndrome now in terms of that diagnosis, which is often very hard to get. In chronic fatigue syndrome, it's called something else these days. But the instances of that syndrome as a result of COVID infection is like 1 in 32.
I've got to say that at least here in Hong Kong, it's disappeared off the radar almost entirely.
It's because pandemic management has become an embarrassment now for governments that they won't even deal with this. We had a long COVID inquiry in this country that came up with all sorts of issues, but then the government really didn't want to provide funds for research in certain areas like this relationship with chronic fatigue. And it's almost like we're all a little bit embarrassed about what happened during the pandemic, and more I see this overwhelming disinformation about the COVID vaccines.
Well, I've got to tell you here, there is no information at all. The government went from, there were posters all over the place. There were huge, big vaccination centres set up so you could go and get vaccinated, and they shut them down. And a day later, it was as though the thing had never happened, and it's still like that.
Yeah.
I don't know anybody.
There's your vulnerability right there.
I don't know anybody who's getting vaccinated at all.
And really, again, not for me to say, but in my case, I will be getting vaccinated for COVID, and I don't have any pre-existing health problems that would put me in a high-risk program. Certainly, in that high-risk area, but increasingly, the data is suggesting that COVID infection it makes you more likely to suffer from a number of chronic illnesses.
I probably do
accelerate that in terms of dementia and things like that.
Yeah. Anyway.
Look, the Americans, the projected excess deaths, and it's one of these things, excess deaths have often been talked about. Oh, it's the vaccines. It's actually COVID. So there's a projection of deaths now, of excess deaths in the United States, Jack, that's in a band between 1.6% and 6%. So that's excess deaths increasing by a minimum of 1.6 up to 6%, which is really, really substantial as a result of COVID. So it's kind of forgotten, and everyone's, sort of wondering whether the vaccines worked, and there's all sorts of nonsense being spoken about there. And it's like we are kind of sleepwalking towards a cliff on this. Anyway, we'll move on. I mentioned the COVID vaccines.
I wouldn't like to have the job of trying to convince people to do something about
this.
It's
almost impossible, Jack.
Almost no one has any faith in the medical experts who say these things.
Apparently, if you have the shot, you'll turn into a transsexual frog, and there's just so much nonsense about it. So if there is a big variant that sweeps across the world again, look out. Moving on to one other potential pandemic is H5N1, which the CDC is under Kennedy Jr. is virtually ignored. There have been stories of poultry workers having H5N1, so that is that big leap from animal, the zoonotic transfer from animal to human. And of course, it continues to provide problems for eggs. I mean, we've got it here too. Eggs are expensive here, and that's largely because of the slaughter. Now, Bobby Kennedy is saying, well, let's just let it rip, see what happens. It's unbelievable. I guarantee you, Jack, that his impact on American public health will be so significant that within 2 years we will notice changes. That is, there will be increases in infant mortality in the United States, and there will be a drop in life expectancy for males and females in the United States within 2 years. I'll have another little prediction there, and we'll see. I'll actually get those figures. We'll go through them next week, and then in 2 years' time, we'll see what's there.
Okay.
Alrighty. Now, meanwhile, the courts are standing up, Jack, in Trump's America.
They
A lot
are.
of it, actually.
There was another one overnight. Another
Yes, there
decision
was.
overnight.
In fact, that's the tariffs. That's Liberation Day has been injuncted, Jack. All the tariffs from there, because the view of the judge, at least, was that tariffs are the responsibility of Congress.
Yes.
But there's been a ton of this
probably
stuff,
right.
and it's become known as chronic injunctivitis, Jack. That's very clever.
It is. I thought it was quite good. There have been an enormous number of single federal court judges offering nationwide injunctions, and this will keep going until it stops.
Well, in his first term, Trump faced a 450% increase in the number of injunctions. We obviously don't have the figures for the second term.
The second term looks even worse already.
Oh yeah, it looks like they'll get to that 450% rise fairly quickly. Well, there's one. The Supreme Court enjoined the Maine House of Representatives from denying State Representative Laurel Libby her right to speak and vote on the floor. But there's a ton of stuff, and as I say, the tariffs are actually, well, the weight of the injunction means they can't. Can they collect them?
That's debatable at this stage.
I would have thought that's fairly sort of crazy, and we're still yet to have a deal, aren't we? I mean, there's still no deal. I mean, the UK thing was kind of, a bit theatrical and not much else. But there hasn't been a country like the Japanese, the South Koreans, the Chinese, the EU who have signed an agreement on tariffs with the Trump administration.
Oh, there have been agreements about specific things, but there hasn't been a nationwide agreement with anybody.
Yeah.
The issue of the single federal court judges granting nationwide injunction, this has been, it didn't exist 50 years ago, but it's been increasing ever since that. And even on the current Supreme Court, most of the judges have spoken out against the idea of this, but it depends upon which way the decision's gone, their attitude to it. So that's, no one knows for sure what they'll do. This, I think, there will be an intervention eventually, either from the Supreme Court, who will take this on and set out the times when a single judge can do a nationwide injunction and the times when you can't, or Congress will intervene, or the third alternative is that the president will ignore the injunctions and then we'll see what happens.
Well, this is in relation to the Kilmar Abrego Garcia case. This is the fellow who's been transported to some hellhole in El Salvador. And the Supreme Court has said they've got to facilitate his release, and they've just gone, well, we can't. We're not.
Yes. They're saying, and you can't interfere in our conduct of foreign policy, and they're probably right. He's probably the executive.
Well, yeah, I don't know where it goes, but he's just ignoring the Supreme Court and the El Salvadoran president. Nice old military junta that he runs has said, we can't help with that either. We don't know where he is.
Yeah,
it sounds like.
But the way this works is that the courts, apart from the federal court, apart from the Supreme Court, are creatures of Congress in this sense that Congress sets them up and Congress can set their limits. So the Congress could pass laws tomorrow to say these are the only circumstances in which you can issue injunctions. This is the limits of your power. But
I'm amused to hear you say that Congress could pass laws tomorrow, Jack.
Well, they could.
Potentially, they could.
They could. Equally, the Supreme Court could make that decision, or what may happen is that the executive, the president, will wait until It's the right decision, the one that's going to be really unpopular, and just say, I'm going to ignore it. And then we'll see where it all ends up.
All right. Now, the Democrats, Jack, they're having a bit of navel gazing.
They are. When people lose, this is what happens, as we've found in Australia.
They've got a lot to worry about there. There's the new book out, and I don't know if you've read it yet, but this is by... this is suggesting, that there was really, and clearly there was, a cover-up of Joe Biden's mental incapacities, and that in turn led to the vice president being promoted without a primary. And really, if you're anti-Trump, if you're an anti-Trump person, the first people you should be looking at for blame are the Democrats.
Yes.
They created the preconditions for his return to the White House.
They did. In fact, the Biden administration did that. They indicted him back into the political race, for starters.
You and I sort of disagree on that, but here we have a president. He was
finished.
In sort of. Well, I just think I don't know that you can ignore the criminality of Trump and just let him go. But look, tactically, that was probably the best thing to do. Accept that. But this is more so. This is like they knew Biden wasn't up to it. They allowed that debate, and you and I were on air, I think, on the day of the debate, or maybe a couple of days afterwards. It was horrendous, and that was the first time I'd heard all these mental incapacities, and you put down missteps, and yes, he's old, and memory will drift in and out. But when I saw him in the debate, I went, "Oh, you bastards have been lying to us for a long time."
Yes,
and that frozen moment he had there, Jack.
There is a large potential problem that this, not that this book has unearthed, but it's a large potential problem that will flow from all of this.
About the presidency generally, yeah, I fully accept that.
The question will be is a whole lot of things that happened with the presidency that are only within the president's authority. So 2,000 pardons, for instance. Did he actually grant the pardons, or were they signed by the auto pen? And if they were signed by the auto pen, under whose instructions?
Yeah, I mean, I get all of that, and that's
a huge problem.
Well, no, it's rearview mirror problem, right? The Democrats have got to make themselves an electable force again.
Well, if you were one of the 2,000 people who were granted the pardon, this is big.
Oh, sure. I mean, if you want to talk about presidential pardons, bizarre. The whole thing is bizarre. I mean, if we want to talk about presidential pardons, I mean, have a look at, Trump kicked onto the street a whole bunch of criminals who've gone on to commit further crimes, many of them. The Jan 6 people. He put someone who trespassed onto the place and was shot dead, just paid $5 million to their family, which is exactly what they were claiming. So no real deal's done there. I mean, if we're looking at transparent government, Jack, you're not really understanding what I'm saying. An absolute disaster.
You're not really understanding what I'm saying. The auto pen's just the tip of the iceberg. The question is going to be, all of those things that really required the president's personal authority, as that the authority resides only in the president.
Oh, you were alive during Reagan's presidency?
Wasn't. People keep telling me that he was gaga long before he left office. I went and had a look a couple of months ago and watched his closing press conference. There was a big difference between Ronald Reagan's closing press conference as president and Joe Biden's performance in that debate, I can tell you.
But by the same token, the administration around Reagan, after his assassination attempt, it's very clear that exacerbated, that being shot in the chest had exacerbated his dementia. And pretty much throughout his second term, there were shortcuts in terms of getting information to the president.
Yeah, well, go and have a look at his closing press conference and compare it to Joe Biden's debate performance, and you'll change your mind. Anyway, I think that's going to be a problem in the short term, because I think there will be court cases about this. People will be challenging decisions that were made.
Well, who's going to challenge the pardon?
Who's going to challenge the pardon?
Yeah.
I can see that a state might do that. It's not just the pardons, though. That's the tip of the iceberg. There's a whole lot of executive orders that were made regarding drilling for oil, for instance, in certain parts. They will be challenged, I would think. And it's, in fact, people are lining the ducks up now to challenge that sort of stuff, saying this was invalid because it wasn't actually approved by the President of the United States.
See, did you hear Trump? Did you hear Trump's address at West Point?
I saw a bit of it, yes.
How did he look?
It just Trump,
Just Trump at 79?
Yeah,
I mean,
he's fine.
he was babbling about yachts. He was babbling about beautiful women, and it was like listening to Abe Simpson.
Yeah, look, there's a lot of things you can criticise Trump for, but if the Democrats really think this is going to fly, that he's just like Joe Biden was, they really are in trouble, because that's just not going to fly.
Well, it's not going to fly that he's mentally incompetent.
No, not after Biden. No.
Yeah. I guess they have shot. They haven't sort of shot their wad on that one.
Yeah.
But there are clear examples that this guy is. He either is being. He's either dissembling or he barely knows what he's talking about.
Yeah. If the Democrats go down this, they may never win government again if they go down that line.
I'll tell you what, if Scott Bessent wasn't the Secretary of the Treasury, Jack, I reckon the Americans would be in recession right now. There would be a run on their bonds. I mean, basically, all of Trump's assertions in economic policy have been disastrous, and it's been down to people like Bessent to pull it back. And if it wasn't for Bessent, actually, I mean, can you imagine the consequences of the continued tariff wars that he's having with virtually everyone around the world?
Yeah, that's probably right.
I said at the time he was a good appointment, and really he is, I guess, what you might call the thin red line between the Trump administration and absolute economic disaster.
Yeah, well, of course that's possible. I mean, it doesn't. The government's travelling much better than it appears from Australia, I can tell you. The latest Rasmussen report has, for the first time since they've been polling this, 51% of Americans think the country's on the right track.
That was a long time ago, Jack. That figure was a long time ago. In fact, what we do know is that Trump's approval ratings are lower than any other president in living history. And the only one that was in the same ballpark was his approval rating after his first term.
Yeah, but he's not standing for re-election. That doesn't matter for him.
Are you sure about that?
Yes, I am.
No. There is no way you could paint this administration as providing great relief to the country. I'll give you a moment. You go and have a look at that Rasmussen. Go and have a look at RCPs while we go for country heading in the right direction. Nowhere near 50% anymore, mate. Nowhere near it. All right. So Russia. While you do that, Jack, if you can. Russia, Ukraine, and Putin. Trump has called Putin crazy. Putin, of course, has continued with bombings and drone attacks into civilian Ukraine. And Trump has come out today and said what Vladimir Putin doesn't realise is that if it weren't for me, lots of really bad things would have already happened in Russia, and I mean really bad. He says, wants to emphasise something, it goes into caps, really bad in caps. He's playing with fire. That was a True Social post from Wednesday night out. And that drew a response from Dmitry Medvedev, who we might remember was a Russian fill-in president in between Putin's presidencies. And he said, regarding Trump's words about Putin playing with fire, and really bad things happening to Russia. I only know of one really bad thing. He put them in caps as well. World War III. I hope Trump understands this. And Medvedev wrote that on X. Where are we now with any sort of peace? I mean, it's just basically gone, hasn't it? Any opportunity that was there is gone.
Don't know.
And look, you know, Trump can talk about this in his late night or early morning Truth Social posts, caps lock on, or he can start imposing some further sanctions on Russia.
Yes, I think that's right.
And that's kind of got to be the next step, surely.
I would think so, yes. That's what I'm expecting.
Yeah, all right. Moving on to Israel, Gaza and the Middle East, Jack. Don't know if you saw this report in the Associated Press. It caught my eye. That the IDF are using Palestinians essentially as human shields, Jack. They'll take them into buildings that may or may not have unexploded munitions or that might be ready to go off, and they'll march these people through.
You mean the buildings are booby-trapped?
Yeah, they'll be booby-trapped. They could be booby-trapped or they could be unexploded munitions. More likely to be unexploded munitions at this stage, Jack. And this is Ayman Abu Hamadan, who was forced into houses in the Gaza Strip to make sure they were clear of bombs and gunmen. When one unit finished with him, he was passed to the next. They beat me and told me, you have no other option. Do this or we'll kill you. The 36-year-old told the Associated Press, describing the 2.5 weeks he was held last summer by the Israeli military in northern Gaza. I think we got some problems there, Jack, in terms of breaches of international law.
I think there would be, yes.
And there have been real concerns about the way in which aid has been distributed into Gaza, Jack. And this led to our very own Prime Minister to give a bit of a takedown of the Netanyahu administration, suggesting that the rollout of aid had been very poorly organised at best.
I've heard varying reports about the rollout of aid.
People being shot, mate. People being shot when they're handing out aid. I mean, it's obviously crazy. You've got people who are hungry beyond belief, starving.
Yeah, I've seen some video footage which looks very encouraging about that, because the idea behind it was to take the aid out of the hands of Hamas. Hamas threatened to shoot its people if they used this new aid distribution system, because that would prevent them from getting a clip off the top, and also prevent them from controlling who got the aid, who got the food, in order to entrench themselves in government. Taking that food away from Hamas and distributing it directly to people seems to me like a really good idea.
The problem you've got with your explanation there is taking it from Hamas and as if aid was immediately distributed. It wasn't. People were left to starve in Gaza, Jack, have starved to death, and that is just completely unacceptable in the 21st century. And we've seen more and more now the UK, Ireland, the French, etc., very, very alarmed about the way in which Netanyahu is taking this, and clearly there are very, very severe humanitarian concerns in Gaza that are not being properly addressed.
My position on this hasn't changed. I don't really look at what people in Western countries are thinking about Israel. I look at what its Arab neighbours think about it, and Israel maintains their
Well, you don't
support.
have to. Don't just take a step back. You don't have to, mate. You don't have to go that far just to get a sense of what is going wrong. You just have to look at the starving bodies, Jack. You just have to look at that. I mean, there's a real moral problem going on here, and it needs to be fixed. We're not the world can't wait for Netanyahu's political political his political resurrection, for him to become the Winston Churchill of the Middle East. I mean,
Well, he's not going to do that. He's very unpopular in Israel.
well, we also saw Israeli protests or protests in Israel, in Tel Aviv, significant numbers again.
Yeah.
And it's worth reminding our listeners too that the coalition that keeps Netanyahu in power is full of extremists. I mean, let's just leave it at that. Full of right-wing extremists and what we might call super Zionists. And I think the world is not paying enough attention to this. That's the problem. And you can talk about the Middle East reaction. I mean, I wouldn't expect an outstanding humanitarian contribution from countries like Qatar and the UAE, Jack.
No, but they're the people who matter, the other Arab countries.
I just,
Because
you're missing the solution
isn't going to come from what Bob Carr thinks. The solution is going to come from what the other Arab countries think.
Well, that may be so, but at least get to the point where you can make a moral assessment about the way in which Gazans have been treated, certainly this year. And they have been starved. They have been blown up. They have we're getting hospitals being blown up again. I mean, I've seen footage of people being dragged out of hospitals into shelters and then back again, and they'll wait for them, and then they'll blow the hospital up.
My moral judgment of this hasn't altered at all. Hamas could end this tomorrow. They've got to surrender and hand back the hostages.
That's just a nonsense. That's just a nonsense. It basically
why is that a nonsense?
That you're saying if we return. I mean, the Israelis have killed their own hostages. You would accept that. You would accept that some of the hostages have been killed by the IDF.
Yes.
No. So
I do.
When we talk about if we return all the hostages,
and surrender.
And surrender,
yes.
then Benjamin Netanyahu will allow more aid into Gaza to feed starving children. You don't see a moral problem there?
I see a moral problem in Hamas not surrendering. They started the war and they've lost it.
I mean, you picked a team. That's okay. But you don't understand the moral issue about Netanyahu using the survival of children in Gaza as his own bargaining chip.
No, I don't think he is. They will fight the war until they win, and so they should.
They will fight the war come what may, whatever thing. If it means the deaths of 50,000 children, then so be it.
They will destroy Hamas, and so they should.
That's not destroying Hamas, Jack. It's destroying the lives of 50,000 children.
Well, if you want to put the moral, make this a moral question,
it is a moral question,
responsibility.
Jack. It is a moral question. It's not pieces on a chessboard. It's not pieces on a chessboard.
Well, I'm sorry. I'm just going to disagree with you. In my view, the moral responsibility lies with Hamas.
But if you don't understand that Netanyahu and the Israeli government and the IDF more generally are amoral, then I'm afraid you're not paying attention.
No, I don't.
They are amoral. They have lost any moral view, any moral superiority that they had over Hamas. And that's not just my view.
Well,
that's the view of pretty much the world.
Yeah, okay.
All right, on to sport now. Will the Tassie Stadium be built? This sounds very trivial by comparison.
Unless you're a Tasmanian.
Well, I know that I've got mates in Tasmania from both sides. The problem they've got with those who support the location and the construction of that particular stadium is the costings they've got are nowhere near what it's going to cost. And the state government is going to be on the hook for minimum $500 million. They've already accepted that they're going to pay a couple of $100 million, I think. But there's no way you can build a purpose-built stadium in this day and age for under $1 billion. They've got a budgeted figure in the 700s. So the state of Tasmania is going to be on the hook for it. the AFL says, if you don't build it, we're not going to come.
Yes, that's right.
And I don't know, maybe a compromise needs to be made. It seems like everyone's very stubborn. The particular location, Jack, is probably not the best place for a stadium. Indeed, that's meant the argument of many of the detractors, and that stadium should be developed elsewhere in Tasmania.
But do they have any other suggestions?
Well, it's right on the water.
Yeah.
And there are particular engineering issues around it too. So this thing's going to cost a fortune, right, if they go ahead with it. And maybe another location in Hobart, obviously, would be perhaps the solution that the AFL and Tasmanians need to break the gridlock. I mean, I know Richo said if you don't build a stadium, it'll be Tasmania's biggest mistake. It will inject an enormous amount of money into Tasmania. It will, employ people and all this sort of stuff. That's absolutely right. But maybe there needs to be a bit of a compromise on the location of that stadium, and perhaps less of the the gold frank, the golden the golden stadium on the beautifully placed on the water, and just a good 50,000 seat stadium.
They're not building 50,000. I think it's 30 odd, I think.
Yeah, well, Joe, that's absolutely right. So, because you put 50 in Hobart, you won't get them.
Well, you couldn't fly enough people in for that. I mean, personally, I think I don't have a view about whether the location's the best one or not. Or
that is one of the arguments as I read it. Yeah.
But I do think there's a huge amount of potential for a small state like Tasmania in having a terrific stadium and making money out of all the people flying in to watch games there.
There's also a push on to make, so that the Tasmanian would be the 19th team. There's actually a push on to make Darwin the 20th, Jack.
Yes.
And look, that could easily work. We see footy being played up there all the time, our AFL footy being played up there all the time. And, of course, the Northern Bears will be, I'm not sure, is that 2028 as well, when the Northern Bears enter the NRL, Jack, in Perth?
Yeah.
How do you reckon that's going to go?
I don't think it will work.
There's probably a fair bit of rugby support in Perth, but that'd be more union, wouldn't it, from the South Africans?
It is, and it tends to be English, New Zealand, and South African in its origin.
Union guys, yeah.
Yeah. So I've really got my doubts about the viability of that. It's very expensive to fly people backwards and forwards to Perth.
It's a logistical nightmare. And as Mick Malthouse said, the Eagles probably should have a couple more flags if they didn't have to do all the travel, all the stuff they had to go.
Well, it's demonstrably true that their careers, if you play over there, are shorter.
Shortened, yeah.
Yeah, because all of that flying backwards and forwards takes out of your body, and also people just get.
You just get tired of it, wouldn't you? Just being in an airport every day, every week.
Yeah. I mean, political careers from Perth tend to be shorter. Yeah. I mean, Stephen Smith's still in London as the High Commissioner, I think. But
that's the top job there. That one, you wouldn't knock that back. But who was it? The Greens senator when he was Section 44. I think he was the first one out the door. Scott
Ludlam.
Ludlam, yes, thank you. And Scott Ludlam, they came up with the Section 44 stuff, and he went, "Yeah, right, I'll go." I think he was just sick of the travel.
Yes,
it's a really hard gig, and when you see these guys turn up and do media, particularly on television in the mornings, you know they're up at 4 o'clock in the morning to do them. And, it's a tough gig. All right, back to footy.
Kim Beazley used to say that my address is care of 1A, seat 1A.
Kimmy would have done some he would have walked on board with some very, very heavy tomes, I would have thought, done a lot of reading on the burner. Who's going well in the AFL? Collingwood, look, we just seem like we're just, again, sleepwalking towards a nightmare, Jack. I mean, they just look like they're just going to win the flag by the length of the straight.
Well, we watched our two teams play one other week or so ago, and I think I sent you a WhatsApp afterwards and said we're not going to need finals tickets, either of us.
I thought it was a bit premature for the Blues, but then they got touched up by the Giants the week after, and they're 4-7. I think the Swans are the same. So no, they won't. We will not be troubling the. I mean, mathematically, it's possible. You would need to win 9 of the next 11 games. So it's going to be tough. But let's push those two sides away. Brisbane obviously look pretty good. Have they're going as well as you'd expect for a reigning premier. Who else have you got? I think Hawthorn have come back to the fold a little bit, Jack. Now they've had some good competition, so they did have some, as we know now, sort of easier wins early on.
And as always, as the Swans found out in the second half of last season, if you're going as well as Hawthorn were, really everybody puts the work into how to play.
Yeah, they're missing their gun forward and things like that. So it's not so easy for them. Adelaide Crows, I'm not entirely convinced about either, and it really does look like Collingwood are just marching on to the flag, and that'll be their 17th. They'll lead the competition in VFL, AFL premierships.
Yeah, long way to go, but their system is really good. Their system stacks up.
Yeah, they're missing probably about 10 players last week and still got the job done against a pretty good opposition.
Yeah.
All right, moving on to Super Rugby. Well, not just before we do go on to that, Jack, the tickets for the British Lions tour went on sale. They're all gone.
Yes.
It's going to be huge, that tour.
Well, Lions tour is always
huge, but rugby union has been the sort of the missing code for in Australia for a little while, but it looks in rude health around a Lions tour.
Yeah, I can remember. You remember the Lions tour of 2001?
Yeah,
and that was absolutely huge. Partly because at that stage, I think it was $3, $3 Aussie dollars to the pound. So Brisbane, Melbourne, and Sydney filled up with financial services guys from London, essentially, who thought this was heaven to come down to Australia and get $3 for every pound they handed over. I remember taxi drivers saying, they jump into a taxi and give you 100 and say, keep the change. I'm going from the city to Perth.
A lot of foreign money here, a lot of overseas money, a lot of English, Irish, Welsh money.
Not much Welsh money.
Probably not, no. But we move on. Why are the Brumbies? I mean, Australian rugby is lurching along. The Reds go okay, generally speaking, but the Waratahs are anybody's guess. But the Brumbies are always thereabouts, Jack.
They are, aren't they? I mean, the Reds have had some good seasons, but they had some real shockers as well, and so have the Waratahs. But I can't remember the Brumbies having a really, really bad year. They're always competitive. Generally speaking, when you see that with a sports franchise, it's because they're really well run. But I don't know enough about them. But that must be it, surely.
They've always got good coaches, I think. I mean, there are a number of coaches have gone on to coach the Wallabies. There's that, but also I think they've got good coaches that that work through. Existence in Canberra has got to be a difficult thing, but you're away from the fish bowls, I suppose, of Sydney and Brisbane, and that might help too.
Yeah.
And of course, last night. Sorry, go on.
And they are a chance to get they're a chance this year because I think if they win this weekend, they're in they might be in a tops 2 spot. So
yeah, that's
which
right.
means a home final.
And Ange Postecoglou has got Spurs their first trophy in a lot of years, Jack. I can't remember how many. I did see the celebrations. and in North London, and very happy Spurs, but they didn't really beat anyone, though, did they? It was a bit of a because I think FIFA or the European branch of FIFA had said basically the European Championships and those that participated in the big clubs like Barcelona and Juventus, for example, wouldn't compete in the Europa Championship. I think that's right. So they played some fairly ordinary opposition and then beat Man United, who you could actually say were pretty limited themselves. I think both sides. I think 15th and 16th.
16th versus 17, I think, or something
16,
like that.
17, yeah.
Yeah.
But look, he got the trophy, but he hasn't got the job yet.
Did you see the goal?
Yeah. It was a scramble.
It was a scramble. One comment I liked on social media was that this is the most Spurs thing ever. They won that trophy with that goal and against Man United. But look, credit to Ange. Wherever he goes, he wins something. He's won something again.
He's given him some hope, but he still hasn't got the job, Jack. They've actually he's now going on holidays without being reappointed for next season.
No, that's because I'm told by people who at least speak to the inner sanctum at Spurs that they have a couple of people they've got in mind, and if they get them, they'll take them. One of those, they'll take them. If they can't, Ange keeps the job.
Seems a bit rough. He doesn't seem terribly troubled by it, but
no, he's now guaranteed to.
He'll get another Premier League job.
Yeah.
Or a job in Europe. Yeah.
Or a job in Europe. Yeah.
No, look, good to see. He's such a wonderful guy. Made a great speech in North London too to celebrating masses. The third season's always better than the second in television, he said, and this will be the same with the Spurs. They've done okay. They've had a terrible Premier League season, but they've had enormous injuries and things like that. So that's perhaps understandable. But he's given the Spurs fans a much maligned and much put upon Spurs fans with a bit of hope. Very quickly.
And a bit of belief within the club that they actually can win something.
Yeah. It breaks that run of zeros. Just a quick one, Jack. I do keep an eye on the county results, and Cameron Green is in a rich vein of form. Still not bowling, but he is making hundreds for fun at the moment. And we do have, gee whiz, it's not that far away, the World Championship of Test Cricket, and still no sense. I have a feeling that they'll probably want to play the two all-rounders. So that will mean a bit of shuffling in the top order to have an opening partner for Usman Khawaja. We'll see.
So who gets the job, Constance or bus charge?
It would, like I say, it wouldn't be Costas. You would play the two and possibly open Marnus, and that could be a bit fraught as well. But Marnus has been facing new ball bowling for a long time. I don't have a big problem with it. I think if he's probably struggling a bit in the last 12 months at number 3, but there's not a lot of difference between number 3 and opening, generally speaking. Look, I'd just love to see him play Bo Webster and Cameron Green. Cameron Green, as I say, is in spectacular form with the bat, which is a good thing. Now, last night, of course, Jack, do you get much of the State of Origin up in Hong Kong?
It's on some of the cable things, and it's certainly on the less strictly legal.
Right, yeah. So I haven't seen the ratings from last night, but generally speaking, State of Origin has a bigger television audience than the AFL Grand Final.
It's generally
they're always sort of
generally the highest rating sports program for the year.
Yeah. So I didn't see it. The Blues came away with a win. Laurie Daly, I don't know, they said he outcoached Billy Slater. And I just watched him in the box, mate. He was just like a supporter. He was just barracking. So I don't know how much tactics went into it, but the Blues got the job done. They probably should have won by a bit more. It was 18-6 in the end, and they, the last 20 minutes of the game, let's say 15, was just a little bit, both sides dropping a lot of footy, making a lot of mistakes and all that sort of stuff. We spoke to the desperation of the Queenslanders, while at the same time the Blues were sort of just trying to keep their lead. So that's the Queensland game done, and I think it's the first time for about 50 years that the New South Wales have won 2 games at Lang Park in a row, 2 State of Origins in a row. So that's pretty good. And, of course, Game 2 is on June 18 at Optus Stadium in Western Australia, Jack.
Yeah.
And I believe that's a sellout, so the 50,000-seat stadium will be sold out there. And then, of course, the third game will be at the Olympic Stadium in Sydney. So one to watch, or 2 to watch, really. But New South Wales have got the job done in Queensland.
Yes.
All righty. Well, that just takes us out. Jono, have you got something else, Jack?
No. Well, I was just going to say that the Origin still draws a crowd into pubs around Asia, especially here, and I think sports generally. I mean, a lot of these things now are carried by dodgy, illegal service providers, and there's a reason for that. Is that the sports themselves charge just too much money to carry these games up here without that.
Well, it's free to wear in Australia, mate. So the mobs that are using it, pirating it, would
They
only
used
just
to free to
dip
wear
in a Channel 9 feed.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all free to wear. In fact, I may be wrong, but I don't think the dedicated Fox Sports Rugby League channel were permitted to broadcast. Could be wrong. That's the case with the AFL, and when you get to the AFL Grand Final and Fox Footy Channel got nothing on. They're not allowed to broadcast it. But anyway, New South Wales have got one under their belt, and we'll see how the rest of it goes. And that takes us out for the show. We got a fair bit from Baseman. We'll have to deal with that next week, but we do want to hear from you guys and talk about what you want to talk about on the show. So feel free to drop us a line. You know how to get hold of us now. You can do it through the Conditional Release Program's Gmail account. You can do it through Jack's what is it? The
Substack.
Your Substack. Yeah, give me that address, please, Jack.
Jack Hoyce, Hong Kong Jack at substack.com, I think.
You're just giving your name away, mate. You'll be beset with stalkers now, and of course you can get hold of me on Jack the Insider at gmail.com. And look, we'll get this program out to you in the next couple of days, and we'll be back to talk about the Victorian Liberal Party, which might be one man down as of Friday night. I look forward to doing that. See you, folks.